The sunlight filtered softly through the sheer curtains of the hospital room, casting faint golden streaks across the sterile white walls. The air smelled sharply of antiseptic, a constant reminder of his new reality. Nathan Cole, once a celebrated architect known for designing some of the city's most iconic buildings, now sat motionless in his wheelchair, staring blankly at the ceiling. 6 months had passed since the accident. 6 months since the car crash stole his freedom. The doctors called it a miracle that he survived, but Nathan didn't see it that way. What kind of miracle left a man unable to stand, let alone create? His body had become a prison, and his once brilliant mind seemed dulled by the monotony of endless treatments. The door opened with a soft click, breaking the heavy silence. A woman's voice, calm but firm, echoed through the room. "Good morning, Mr. Cole. I'm Sophia Brooks, your new caregiver." Nathan didn't respond. He barely glanced at her as she approached. A slender woman in her early 30s, her dark hair pulled back neatly, her face calm but shadowed by something unspoken. Sophia hesitated for a moment before continuing. "I'm here to help, and if you'll let me, I think we can make this work." Nathan's lips curled into a bitter smirk. "Help?" he muttered. "No one can help me." Her expression didn't falter. "We'll see about that." The first morning of Sophia's work felt like a battle Nathan had no intention of fighting. She tried to keep the conversation light as she prepared his breakfast, a bland mix of oats and fruit prescribed by his doctor. But Nathan's silence was impenetrable. "Do you prefer tea or coffee?" she asked, setting the tray on the bedside table. He didn't answer. Sophia sighed and placed the cup of tea she had brewed within reach. "Tea it is, then." Nathan's hands rested on the armrests of his wheelchair, his knuckles pale, as if gripping some invisible barrier around him. "You don't have to try so hard," he finally said, his tone cold. "You won't last long anyway." Sophia paused, her hands stilling over the tray. "You don't know me yet, Mr. Cole," she said quietly, "but I don't give up easily." Nathan let out a dry laugh, devoid of humor. "Is that what you told the last one?" Her jaw tightened, but she refused to take the bait. "I'm not here to argue. I'm here to help." The standoff was interrupted by a soft knock on the open door. A small voice followed. "Mommy?" Sophia turned to see her 5-year-old daughter Grace standing hesitantly in the doorway, clutching a worn stuffed elephant. Her wide, curious eyes locked onto Nathan. "Is that the man you're helping?" Grace asked innocently. Sophia's face softened. "Yes, sweetheart. Come say hello." Grace approached timidly, then stopped short, staring up at Nathan. "Why are you sad?" Nathan blinked, caught off guard by the simple question. "I'm not sad," he said stiffly. Grace tilted her head, unconvinced. "But your eyes are sad." Sophia stepped forward quickly, ushering her daughter out of the room. "Come on, Grace. Let Mr. Cole rest." Nathan's gaze lingered on the doorway long after they were gone, her words echoing in his mind. That evening, after Grace had fallen asleep on the small couch in the corner of Nathan's room, Sophia sat by the window, the glow of the city skyline visible in the distance. She glanced at Nathan, who was staring out into the darkness, his face unreadable. "Your daughter," Nathan said suddenly, breaking the silence. "She's persistent." Sophia smiled faintly, her fingers idly twisting the hem of her sweater. "She gets that from me." Nathan turned his gaze toward her, curiosity flickering in his tired eyes. "Does her father share that trait?" The question caught Sophia off guard. She hesitated before answering. "He's not in the picture," she said simply, her tone even but edged with a quiet strength. Nathan arched a brow, waiting for her to continue. Sophia took a deep breath, her voice steady but soft. "He left when Grace was barely a year old, said he wasn't ready for the responsibility. I didn't have the luxury of not being ready, so I decided I'd handle it on my own." Nathan studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. "That couldn't have been easy." "No," Sophia admitted, her gaze drifting to the sleeping form of her daughter. "But Grace is my world. She makes it worth it." The room fell into silence again, But it wasn't the oppressive kind that had dominated Nathan's life for months. It was quieter, softer, filled with the unspoken understanding of shared struggles. Nathan's voice was low when he finally spoke. "It's hard to fight when you feel like you're already beaten." Sophia turned to him, her eyes steady and kind. "You'd be surprised how much strength you have left when you're fighting for someone else." Nathan didn't respond, but the faintest flicker of something, maybe hope, crossed his face. The next afternoon, Sophia was tidying up the room while Grace sat cross-legged on the floor, humming a cheerful tune and drawing with crayons. Nathan watched silently from his wheelchair, his expression distant but less sharp than usual. "Why are you humming, Grace?" Nathan asked suddenly, surprising both of them. Grace looked up with a bright smile, holding up her drawing, a stick figure family standing under a rainbow. "Because it makes me happy." Nathan's lips twitched, almost forming a smile, but he quickly averted his gaze. A short while later, Sophia began helping Nathan prepare for his daily stretching routine. Grace wandered over, clutching her beloved stuffed elephant, and stopped a few feet away. "Mr. Nathan," she said softly, her voice full of childlike curiosity, "why are you sad?" Sophia froze, her heart pounding as she turned to Grace. "Sweetheart, that's not a night—" "It's fine," Nathan interrupted, his voice quieter than usual. He met Grace's gaze, and for a moment, his usual bitterness seemed to waver. "I'm not sad," he said, though his tone lacked conviction. Grace tilted her head, her curls bouncing. "But your eyes are sad." Nathan opened his mouth to reply, but no words came. Instead, he simply looked at her, his expression shifting into something almost vulnerable. Grace stepped closer, her small hand holding out the stuffed elephant. "You can borrow Ellie," she offered earnestly. "She makes me feel better when I'm sad." Nathan stared at the toy, clearly unsure of how to respond. Finally, he reached out, his hand trembling slightly, and accepted the elephant. The room seemed to hold its breath. "Thank you," he said softly, his voice barely audible. Grace beamed and wrapped her tiny arms around his arm in a brief, gentle hug. "Hugs help too," she said matter-of-factly. Sophia's eyes welled up as she watched the interaction. It was the first time since she'd arrived that Nathan's pain seemed to lift, if only for a moment. As Grace skipped back to her crayons, Sophia approached Nathan. "She's got a way of getting through to people, doesn't she?" Nathan looked down at the stuffed elephant in his lap, his fingers brushing against its worn fabric. "She does," he admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "She reminds me of what it feels like to hope." Sophia's breath caught. "Maybe that's a good thing." Nathan didn't reply, but for the first time in months, the walls around him seemed to crack, letting in a sliver of light. The pool at Nathan's estate gleamed in the late afternoon sun, its crystal clear water reflecting the sky above. It had been untouched since the accident, a stark reminder of what he had lost. Now, for the first time, Nathan found himself being wheeled toward its edge by Sophia. "I'm not sure about this," Nathan muttered, gripping the armrests of his wheelchair. Sophia crouched beside him, her voice calm but firm. "I know it feels daunting, but hydrotherapy can help with your muscles and circulation. The water will support your weight, make it easier to move. Trust me." Nathan let out a shaky breath, his jaw tightening. "Fine, but if this is just another pointless exercise—" "It's not," she interrupted gently, her gaze steady. "One step at a time, Nathan. That's all we focus on." With her help, Nathan eased himself into the water. The warmth enveloped him, unfamiliar but strangely comforting. He closed his eyes for a moment, allowing himself to relax as the buoyancy lifted some of the tension in his body. "Good," Sophia said encouragingly, her hands supporting him as she guided his movements. "Let's start with some light stretches." Nathan's arms moved awkwardly at first, his muscles stiff and uncooperative. Sophia's touch was steady, her guidance patient. She didn't rush him, didn't push him past his limits. "This feels strange," Nathan admitted, his voice tinged with vulnerability. That's normal, Sophia replied. It's progress, Nathan, even if it doesn't feel like it yet. Minutes turned into an hour, and with each small movement, Nathan began to rediscover fragments of control over his body. The water made it easier to move his legs, even if only slightly. It was the first time in months he had felt something close to freedom. As they finished the session, Sophia helped him back into his wheelchair. Nathan's hands gripped the armrests, his knuckles white. "How was it?" Sophia asked, wiping her hands on a towel. Nathan didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stared at the pool, his expression thoughtful. "It wasn't as awful as I expected," he admitted gruffly. Sophia smiled, a small victory. "We'll build on that." The next few weeks followed a steady rhythm of rehabilitation. Each morning, Sophia arrived promptly, her determination unshaken. She guided Nathan through stretches, encouraged him during moments of frustration, and celebrated even the smallest victories. One day, as they worked in the therapy room, Nathan suddenly stopped. "Sophia," he said, his voice hesitant. She turned to him, wiping sweat from her brow. "What's on your mind?" "I want to try standing," he said, his voice firmer this time. Sophia's eyes widened. "Are you sure? It's going to be tough." "I know," Nathan replied, "but I need to try. I have to." Taking a deep breath, Sophia positioned herself beside him. "All right? On the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Nathan pushed with his arms, his legs trembling as they tried to bear his weight. Pain shot through his body, but for a fleeting moment he was upright. He stood. It didn't last long. His knees buckled, and he collapsed back into the wheelchair. "No!" Nathan roared, his voice raw with frustration. Sophia crouched in front of him, taking his hands in hers. "Nathan, you stood. Even if it was for a moment, you stood. That's not failure. That's progress." Nathan's breathing was ragged, his emotions swirling, but as he looked into Sophia's determined eyes, something inside him steadied. "We'll try again," he said quietly. Sophia nodded, a proud smile breaking across her face. "We'll try again, and again, as many times as it takes." Late one evening, as Sophia was tidying up Nathan's study, her phone buzzed on the table. She picked it up, expecting a routine message. But what she read made her blood run cold. "You don't belong here. Stay away from Nathan." The sender was anonymous, but the intent was clear. Sophia's breath quickened, and her hand instinctively went to her daughter Grace, who was humming a soft tune while coloring on the floor nearby. Deleting the message, she forced herself to stay calm. She couldn't let this threat rattle her. Nathan and Grace needed her to stay strong. The following afternoon, a loud crash shattered the quiet of the estate. Sophia and Nathan rushed toward the sound, stopping abruptly when they reached the pool area. One of the tall glass windows was fractured, a spider web of cracks radiating from its center, with shards scattered across the tiles. Sophia bent down and picked up a smooth stone lying amidst the broken glass. "A rock," she murmured, her voice unsteady despite her attempt to sound calm. Nathan wheeled closer, his eyes narrowing. "That wasn't an accident." Sophia hesitated, weighing her words carefully. "Maybe it's just kids playing pranks. You know how they are." "Don't," Nathan interrupted, his voice cold but controlled. "You don't believe that, any more than I do." Sophia exhaled slowly, her shoulders tense. She didn't want to worry him, but it was clear he wasn't letting this go. "Someone sent me a message last night," she admitted reluctantly. "It said I don't belong here, that I should stay away from you." Nathan's jaw tightened, his hands gripping the armrests of his wheelchair. "And you didn't think to tell me?" "I didn't want to add to your stress," Sophia said, her voice soft but firm. Nathan's expression darkened, his frustration evident. "Sophia, someone is trying to scare you, and they're not going to stop. This isn't just about you. Grace lives here too." Sophia's chest tightened at his words. "Nathan, this isn't your fight. You need to focus on your recovery, not—" "No," he said firmly, his tone resolute. "This is my fight now. I won't sit back and let someone hurt you or Grace. Whoever's doing this, they'll have to deal with me first." For a moment, Sophia was struck by the strength in his voice. The man who had once seemed so defeated now radiated a quiet resolve. "All right," she said finally, her voice trembling but steady. "We'll face this together." Nathan nodded, his expression fierce. Together. The estate was eerily silent that night. Grace was fast asleep in a cozy corner of Nathan's room, her stuffed elephant tucked under her arm. Sophia sat on the small couch by the window, her eyes scanning a book she couldn't concentrate on. The tension from earlier events still lingered in the air, pressing heavily on her chest. A faint creak from the hallway jolted her from her thoughts. She froze, her heart pounding. Nathan stirred in his wheelchair, his sharp eyes locking on the door as it slowly pushed open. Stepping into the room was Mrs. Caldwell, the former housekeeper. Her usually composed appearance was gone, replaced by a disheveled look and a manic gleam in her eyes. In her hand was a syringe filled with clear liquid, her grip tight and unsteady. "Mrs. Caldwell," Sophia's voice wavered as she stepped forward. "What are you doing here?" Caldwell's lips curled into a sneer. "You've ruined everything," she hissed. "Nathan was fine before you showed up. He was mine to take care of. My responsibility." Sophia frowned, her mind racing. "You don't want him to get better, do you?" Caldwell's expression twisted with anger. "Better?" she spat. "If he recovers, there's no place for me here. Do you know how many years I've devoted to this house, to him? When he lost everything, he needed me. But you've made him believe he can live without me." Sophia stepped in front of Nathan, shielding him as Caldwell advanced. "He deserves a chance to recover, to have a life again," Sophia said firmly. But Caldwell shook her head, her voice rising. "No, if he recovers, I lose everything. I'm the only one who truly understands what he's been through." Nathan's voice interrupted her, calm but sharp. "Caldwell, you're wrong. You've been clinging to control, not helping me. Let it go before it destroys you." Caldwell let out a strangled cry, her face twisted with desperation, and lunged toward them, syringe raised high. Time seemed to slow as Sophia grabbed the nearest object, a heavy lamp. Her hands trembled, but she swung it with all her strength. The lamp connected with a sickening crack, sending Caldwell staggering backward. The syringe slipped from her fingers, rolling across the floor as silence fell over the room, broken only by Grace's muffled whimper from her corner. "You'll regret this," Caldwell snarled, clutching her arm as she stumbled toward the door. With one last furious glare, she turned and fled into the shadows of the hallway. Sophia quickly locked the door, her hands trembling. She turned to Nathan, who was staring at her, his face pale but resolute. "Are you okay?" he asked hoarsely. "I'm fine," Sophia said, though her voice shook. "We need to call the police." Nathan nodded, his jaw tightening. "We will. But Sophia, thank you. You saved me." Sophia's eyes softened, and she knelt beside him, resting her hand over his. "We saved each other." As the flashing lights of police cars illuminated the estate later that night, Nathan sat silently, watching Sophia hold Grace tightly in her arms. For the first time in months, he realized how much they had risked for him. Fear still lingered, but it was overshadowed by a growing resolve. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for them, his newfound family. The following weeks were grueling, filled with endless therapy sessions and small but hard-earned victories. Grace became Nathan's biggest cheerleader, her boundless enthusiasm and unwavering belief in him pushing him forward when his own will faltered. "Come on, Mr. Nathan," Grace's voice echoed in the therapy room one morning, her small hands clapping in rhythm. "You can do it. Just one step." Nathan chuckled softly, though his face was lined with concentration. "You're relentless, you know that?" "That's what Mommy says too," Grace replied with a grin, holding up her stuffed elephant. "Ellie says you're ready." Sophia stood nearby, her steady hands ready to catch Nathan if he faltered. "She's right," Sophia said gently. "You've been working so hard, Nathan. Today might just be the day." Nathan gripped the parallel bars tightly, his knuckles white. He had tried and failed to stand and walk many times before, but something about Grace's unshakable faith gave him strength. Taking a deep breath, he braced himself. "One step at a time," Sophia reminded him softly. He nodded. "All right, let's do this." With a deep inhale, Nathan pushed himself up from his wheelchair. His legs shook violently, his muscles screaming in protest, but he fought against the pain. For a moment, he was standing, fully upright. Grace squealed in delight. "You did it!" But Nathan wasn't finished. Slowly, deliberately, he shifted his weight forward and lifted one foot. It hovered in the air for a second before landing a few inches ahead. Then another step. "I'm walking," Nathan whispered, his voice breaking with emotion. "Yes, you are," Sophia said, tears streaming down her face as she steadied him. Grace jumped up and down, her laughter filling the room. "I knew you could do it. You're like a superhero." Nathan took one final step before collapsing into Sophia's arms, his chest heaving with exhaustion and triumph. "You've done it," Sophia whispered, her voice filled with pride. Nathan looked at Grace, who beamed up at him, her eyes shining with joy. "Thank you, Grace," he said softly. "I couldn't have done it without you." That evening, as the family sat together on the balcony, Nathan rested his hand on Grace's head, his other hand lacing with Sophia's. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, he didn't just feel alive. He felt whole. The months that followed were filled with both triumph and challenge, but Nathan's determination never wavered. Every step he took, no matter how small, was a victory shared by the three of them: Nathan, Sophia, and Grace. One sunny afternoon, Nathan stood at the edge of the garden terrace, the breeze tugging gently at his shirt. He wasn't holding on to bars or being steadied by anyone. This time, he stood on his own. "Ready, Mr. Nathan?" Grace's voice chirped behind him, her excitement bubbling over. She held a small ribbon in her hand, tied like a medal. Nathan turned, smiling at her, his heart swelling with gratitude. "Ready, Coach Grace." Sophia stood beside Grace, her hands clasped tightly together, tears glistening in her eyes. She had seen every ounce of effort Nathan had poured into this moment, and now she was witnessing its reward. Nathan took a breath, his legs steady beneath him. With measured movements, he stepped forward. One step, then another. Grace cheered loudly, running to meet him halfway. "You're walking! You're really walking!" When he reached her, Nathan crouched down, still shaky, but stronger than he had been in years, and hugged her tightly. "I couldn't have done it without you, Grace," he said softly. As Sophia joined them, Nathan stood again, wrapping an arm around her waist. He looked at both of them, his family, the people who had brought him back to life. "I used to think my life was over," Nathan said, his voice steady, "but you showed me it was just beginning." Sophia rested her head against his shoulder, her voice warm and filled with emotion. "And we're only getting started." Grace laughed, holding up her ribbon. "Now you get the Super Stepper Award." As laughter filled the air, the three of them walked together toward the house, the golden sun casting long shadows behind them. They weren't just moving forward. They were building a life filled with hope, love, and second chances. The scars from their past would always remain, but they no longer defined them. Together, they had created something stronger, a future worth fighting for. Nathan's journey reminds us that even in our darkest moments, hope can be found, and new beginnings are always possible. His story is a powerful testament to love, resilience, and the strength we find in those who believe in us. If this journey touched your heart and reminded you of the strength we can find in one another, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. By subscribing, you'll join us in exploring more stories of resilience and connection, stories that remind us it's never too late to start again. Together, let's walk toward brighter days, just like Nathan, Sophia, and Grace. Thank you for being part of this journey. We can't wait to share more with you.